I'm Jane Hunt. I am a tutor and programme coordinator at Black Mountains College here in Talgarth, where I teach at the Troy de Haan Farm campus. I would like to introduce today's speakers, Sue Pritchard and Ian Rapal. Sue is the Chief Executive of Food, Farming and Countryside Commission and is focused on leading the organisation in its mission to bring people together to find radical and practical solutions, practical ways to transform our food system and improve our climate, nature, health and economy. Sue brings an extensive experience working with leaders in business, governments and enterprises, blending academic and practical for sustainable systems change. Sue sits on several research advisory panels on the food, farming systems and land use, and is a trustee of the Black Mountains College and Co-Farm in Cambridge. Sue lives with her family on an organic permaculture farm, livestock farm in Wales. Ian is the director for the College of Real Farming, Food and Culture. He is a radical ecologist and has 3 decades of experience in education, activism and environmental conservation. Jade and I will be monitoring the chat for any questions as we go along. And Ian is going to start with a presentation, which I did have ready, but we shall see. So I'm going to try sharing my screen now. Bear with, there we go. Okay, and I'll let Ian talk.
Okay, can everybody hear me all right? Somebody say yes.
Yes. Yes.
Lovely, perfect answer, thank you very much. Yeah, so my name is Ian, I live in Talgarth. I'm on the curriculum advice group for the Black Mountains College, but I'm also on the land advice group. And I've got a background in land management amongst other things. So when the possibility of the Black Mountains College taking on a 120-acre farm up on the north slopes of the Black Mountains came up, we all got very excited because this was a chance to base not just a curriculum on the land, but also to look at the relationship between farming, climate change and the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act and all the issues that surround that. So in essence, what we're thinking of in terms of the farm is that it's, if you like, an experimental farm. It's no use at one level pretending that we're going to be able to produce an agroecological farm that other farmers around us will be able to copy because of all the various economic and other pressures that they're under. And what we want to do is think about something that was longer term. So we got together with the college and with the local community members around here and Talgarth and the North Black Mountains to think about ways that we could manage the farm that would dovetail with the curriculum and also perhaps, if you like, provide a basis for thinking about farming over the generations and not just in the here and now and responding to the existing pressures. So I just wanted to talk you through a couple of the plans as they stand, and I'll skip through a couple of slides that are a bit superfluous to this audience, but the main thing we want to talk about is the sort of stage that we're at with the farm planning. As I said, it's about 120 acres. It's been under quite intensive sheep grazing for the last sort of 20 years. It's been a single farm unit for over 100 years, and it's got upland rights for about 750 head of sheep, should we wish to exercise that. But what we want to do in the first instance is to take the land under the stewardship of the college and basically give it a chance to breathe and to find out what's there. So for the first phase, for the next couple of years, in line with permaculture principles and those sorts of very sensible ecological approaches, we wanted to just, if you like, lessen the intensity of the grazing, look at the boundaries, make sure the site is secure, and start doing ecological surveys, soil surveys, those sorts of things to find out what is there before we actually start implementing any sort of longer term land use plans. So the map that you've got in front of you gives a very broad and movable plan that we're working on at the moment, but it's all up for discussion, debate, not least with the local community, because what we want to make sure is that the farm that has played a role in the community of Talgarth maintains that function to some degree. The orange block that you can see is at the moment marked out for a horticultural course, restorative horticulture, as part of the Black Mountains College, but also has potential for a CSA. It's one of the flatter areas and access is pretty good. Behind that and abutting the gliding centre that that are our neighbours, we've got plots which could be suitable. They're quite flat, quite well drained, so possibly suitable for some experimental arable over the years, and or community hay meadows. There's a local group called On the Verge that are, if you like, developing species-rich meadows across the road network and inside communities and that sort of stuff. So it would be good for them to have a source of seed and green hay. So that's one possibility. So if you like, there's a strong sort of community element within the plan as it stands. And then there's also earmarked a community woodland area, which at the moment is a field that on first surveys may not be the most suitable because it's been full of wax caps this year. It's been a brilliant year for wax caps. So we may have to make some alterations to those plans, but the rest of the unit, really, we're looking at 2 large blocks, and in the short term, just lessening the grazing pressure in conjunction with the existing or new grazing partners. It's all under, I think there are 3 different grazers on the land at the moment, but their agreements come to an end sometime in the new year. And what we're hoping to do is actually move over towards cattle if we can get the infrastructure right, and to just, if you like, push and pull at the site for a couple of years in order to see what's there before we start thinking about bringing in agroecological initiatives. So, and opening the site up to things like micro dairies or anything else like that. So we're right at the beginning of the process in a way. What we're doing is taking our time, if you like, not rushing into anything, but also being very explicit about the need and the desire for the land to be maintained as farmland. I mean, there are areas, especially where we abut the SSI woodlands of Pulverach, where we could look at woodland regeneration, and we could also look at infield tree planting and agroforestry and those sorts of things. But at the moment, what we want to do is just get to know the site, and that's where we're going to be working with the students to make sure that they are part of the process of learning what's on the site and finding out what the ecology of the site is before we actually make any longer term decisions. The main principles that, in terms of how the land will be farmed going forward, is around agroecology. So that is treating the farm unit as an ecosystem, minimal inputs and maximum nutrient cycling wherever possible. And then also in the context of where it sits, actually start working with landowners around us to see where we can maintain ecological connectivity and those sorts of things. So it's a chance, and a rare chance, to take on a farm and think long term, in terms of the challenges that are coming down the road, not just the specific challenges to the farming sector or to conservation even, but also in climate change and also nature recovery and those sorts of agendas. So that's it, really. Look forward to any questions. Thanks.
Right, if we could keep any, perhaps could stop sharing a second, if we can keep any questions until after Sue has spoken, and save them until the end, if that's okay. So Sue, do you want to have your say?
Actually, so I'm going to be quite quick because I think there's going to be lots of chat, judging by the way that the chat's progressing at the moment. Ian's description was lovely, and it's lovely to see for Black Mountains College. But from my point of view, it's also a demonstrator site of the kind of farms and farming that we're starting to talk a lot more about. In fact, across the whole of the UK, not just in Wales, there are all sorts of potential labels for that kind of a farm. A permaculture design, or regenerative agriculture, agroecology. We've started talking in our world, in FFCC, about the modern mixed farm as a very kind of straightforward way of describing what farms should and could look like to address the multiple challenges in front of us, the climate crisis, the nature crisis, but also, of course, in the case of BMC, how we grow the skills that we need amongst young people for the future, how we almost rethink the way we imagine the future, we imagine ourselves in that future, we imagine our leadership in that future, and how we can kind of work more effectively with what we already know is going to be an incredibly turbulent, uncertain, volatile, ambiguous future. And just, you've probably been talking about this in other settings, but just coming out of COP26 just a couple of weeks ago, whilst, when you're kind of clutching at straws, there are some promising prospects emerging out of it, but however you cut it, all we have at the moment are pledges for reductions which don't add up to enough, and that is depending on those pledges being delivered, for which we have no evidence so far that that's likely to be the case. So the need for transformative food, farming and land use, as well as transformative education taken together, could not be more critical. And it's why I'm involved with BMC as Chief Exec of FFCC, as Jane said right at the start. So I get super excited about what the college can do with the farm that we've been very lucky to be given. But I was just going to say a little bit too about the type of education that we're wanting to offer from BMC, because there are all sorts of parallels actually with the way we want to use our land. The model that Ian was describing there is about diversity. It's about blending difference on the landscape. It's about being really responsive to how things are and being able to act responsively to what you're finding around you. So it's about bringing creativity and innovation into problem solving. It's about understanding, ourselves as agents of that change and ourselves in that landscape. And the degree programs that BMC is designing, which we're hoping to be recruiting for next year for a 2023 start, have got similar values underpinning them. So it's both radical and deeply practical. It's about real world skills at a time when we face unprecedented challenges, that extraordinary turbulence and uncertainty. But it does start from a place that, however we feel about the future, optimistic or pessimistic, it's what we do that matters. It's what we do in a really practical way that matters. And I think for young people, that's a really, really critical message. I've got a whole focus group of young people of my own amongst our children and their partners. And it can be incredibly disheartening for them to look forward to a future in which we're not taking the action that we're talking about here. So, like the way that we're working with the farm, the education that BMC and the degree course that BMC seeking to provide is transdisciplinary. It's about thinking about learners, about young people as really influential, capable agents of change, about giving them a whole range of skills. So bringing that kind of transdisciplinary, interdisciplinary perspective, as we do on the farm, but into the education curriculum, how we bring together those sorts of education, knowledge, research and evidence that's so often siloed in different academic disciplines, but blending it together in a curriculum that gives them a range of knowledge and experience to draw on, but it also builds in criticality. It also brings in that capacity for making good judgments and making sense of a world that can be, well, let's just say a hot mess at times. So, I mean, it's a Welsh curriculum. It's focused on leadership for future generations, which I think, we know in Wales, we're leading the world on a narrative that pays attention to the well-being of future generations and builds that into our policy making. It builds in design thinking, again, really consistent with how we want to work on the farm. But it's not anti-technology, but it critically appraises the kinds of technologies that are consistent with the values and principles that we're talking about here. And it also gives students an opportunity to choose something about which they feel really passionate, and to do the work that they want to do around that in year 3, their research program. So it makes them independent, creative, engaged, curious, inquiring learners. And Lord knows that's probably the state that we all need to be in the world that we're in at the moment. And perhaps the last thing to say is that the whole curriculum is designed to be incredibly accessible for people who've come from all sorts of backgrounds and experiences. We're not assuming or indeed requiring particular entry requirements, but we are seeking to involve and include the broadest range of students that we possibly can, because we fundamentally believe that everyone can bring leadership to transforming and creating the world that we need. I'll stop there, I think, and start looking at all the questions that we've got coming up in the chat. Thanks. And opening space for others. Yeah.
Thanks, Ian and Sue. Thank you for that. I can't see any direct questions other than some questions about the courses and stuff, which I've answered in the chat already. But I have got a couple of questions. I wouldn't mind both of you answering. So my first question is, the college has a 120-acre farm. Why has it chosen to go down the agroecology route, not the rewilding route like so many others seem to be doing at the moment? Who wants to answer that first?
Go on.
Okay.
So I think there's at one level there's a whole lot of talk about big complex issues with lots of different labels that can be really mind-numbing and frankly really quite excluding of lots of folk. But I think there is a really good reason, certainly from my point of view, there is a really good reason that we in FFCC talk about agroecology, and I know BMC is committed to the same principle. Agroecology is a set of principles and practices that's been developed over decades with countries all around the world, and latterly, in the last 10 years, designed explicitly to support progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. The Sustainable Development Goals are one of the very, very few things, possibly the only thing, for which there is multinational agreement that drives collective action around the world for a more sustainable future. And the definitions and practices of agroecology have been developed and refined, particularly over the last 10 years, to support progress for all of those goals. So some of the other labels that we hear used, like regenerative agriculture, or rewilding, land sparing, rewilding and sustainable intensification at the other end of the spectrum, only meets some of those challenges. So ecosystem restoration is of course important, and there are some parts of the country where that is by far the best thing to do. But it doesn't help us meet some of the other challenges that we also face, which is a food secure Britain, where we take responsibility for growing more of the healthy food that everybody needs. When we can see that climate nature crisis, as well as geopolitical crises, are having massive impacts on other growing regions. So integrating food back in to the conversation, which rewilding does not do terribly well, feels really critically important to help us meet the health and well-being needs of our citizens, as well as taking more responsibility for a food secure future, not offshoring our carbon and nature impacts elsewhere in the world. So agroecology, for me, is one of the very few ways of thinking about food and farming in the future that is rooted in a well-developed science and a set of values and principles, which are crucially agreed with countries all around the world, particularly the global south. You'll have seen perhaps you may have spotted in the COP document at the end, agroecology was explicitly mentioned in the text in square brackets, which means it's not finally agreed, it's going to be further discussed. But the countries that were arguing really strongly to keep agroecology in the text for land use were the least developed countries, developing south, the global south, the low-lying countries, and the European Union. And the countries that were arguing against it were the US and India, President Modi's India, and latterly he's just changed his policy to meet the demands of Indian farming unions.
If I could, sorry, I'm just conscious of the time, and we've had a few more questions in the chat. I'd like to try and squeeze them in if I can. Thank you very much for your answer. So I'll just run quickly through. Can you see the college forming alliances with other farms and educational organisations, I'm guessing, across Wales and parts of the UK? I can probably answer that one, yes. What livestock breeds are you thinking about? Native, ancient cattle, Wales, it'd be good to have Welsh Black, etc. Do you want to answer that one, Ian? Because you probably know more about it.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think as much as it's, we're talking about an experimental farm and good agroecological principles, we also have to overlap our responsibilities to the community. So the issues around things like livestock type are very important. And Targarth has got one of the last home kill butchers in Wales, I think. So there is the possibility, if we can tie up with that, to have a good meat box scheme up and running. And as much as we would like perhaps to have something like Welsh Black up on the farm holding itself, the chances are, if we're going to be realistic and we can tie it to something like a meat box scheme, we'll need something that's a bit friendlier for a home kill butcher to deal with. And Welsh Black are lovely, but they're not the friendliest breed when you get them in the box. So we might have to come off the kind of ideal in the first few years as we're getting that established. But we do also have the commons rights to play with, and one of the projects that we want to get involved in is getting cattle back up onto the common. So now that the technology's moved on and there's virtual fences and those sorts of things, we can play around, I think, with some of the breeds up there that would be a bit more hardy.
Okay, one of the other questions is, so I can't see who's asked that question, but interested to know is whether the farm will be wholly organic.
Well, same answer as previous in a way. It would be lovely to have it wholly organic, but we might have to think about those things in the longer term. I think, as I said, we've got to, if you like, we've got to gel the college to the farm and the farm to the community, and that's quite a tricky process. And the land group is sort of wrestling with those things at the moment. So whether we go to wholly organic or whether we just go down the route as far as possible, we'll discover over the next few years. But I mean, by letting the land rest, we're hoping we'll be able to find out what the benefits and pros and cons of the different approaches would be.
Sue, did you want to answer? I can see you actually commented in the comments.
I was talking about the cattle actually, and thinking about cattle that cope well on steep Welsh slopes. I mean, I'm an organic farmer myself. I know you need if we are going to turn the farm organic, we will need to know that we've got essentially a good farm manager who can manage the requirements of organic accreditation, because actually it's involved and it's time consuming, as indeed it should be. So we probably would have to look a little bit at the resourcing that we need around that, and the balance of resources we've got for the other activities that we need to develop sooner rather than later. But that's definitely something that we talk about. But we should absolutely be using working to organic principles and applying organic and regenerative principles and practices on the land at all times, whether or not we've already sought accreditation. But personally, and I'd have to convince my fellow trustees of this, I think putting the effort into getting accreditation does stand for something. It does mean something. And for those folk who say, I farm organically in principle, I'm just not accredited, it kind of undermines the whole movement towards organic, when in the UK we are so behind the rest of Europe in making that transition. So for me, it's a bit of a kind of principle thing, and a bit of aligning yourself with, or ourselves with, the campaign for changing food and farming. But that's very much a discussion that trustees and the staff will have to have together.
Thank you, Sue. Very quickly, I've got one other question, unless anyone else has got one. How do you see the farm campus and the students linking with the community of Talgarth?
Wow. Well, in the first instance, there needs to be a lot more sort of, if you like, consultation. So we need to get key members of the community up to the farm. But the plans for the community supported agriculture area is probably the most significant. If we can get an active and dynamic CSA off the ground, linked to some of the other elements of, because Talgarth's got a whole load of green initiatives on the ground. So if we can get those linked locally to the town itself, but also wider to Hay-on-Wye, Breck and Crickhowell, then we've got a chance of bringing in lots of really good people from the community, and they're all chomping at the bit. I mean, the farm, most of the people locally know who's farmed that land. They know the history of it, and that's why there's so much, if you like, community interest in what we're doing up there. And I'm a member of the community, and
we've got 1 minute left. Sue, do you want to quickly squeeze something in there on that point?
I just think it's an incredibly important project, and I'm not far from Talgarth in UK terms, but I'm not that close in Monmouthshire. I'm in the adjacent county, but I think this project has the potential to be a world-leading project, a seriously world-leading and groundbreaking project. And Wales has got a history of doing really interesting, world-leading, groundbreaking things. So I'm really hoping that the community of Talgarth will enjoy being part of that.
Great, thank you both.